Hi there everyone, and welcome to FiST Chat, the vodcast that features discussions on the topics of film, science and technology. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How you doing there, Steve?
Good, mate. How are you, Ben? Hello to everyone out there in FiST Chat land. I'm
good. Good to see you again, and we're going to have another good chat today. So don't forget our website, www.fistchat.com. You can get all our social media, Facebook, Twitter links. Watch us on YouTube, get us MP3, subscribe to iTunes. I think we've pretty much got everything covered there in any way, shape or form. So you'll be able to catch us there. So without further ado, we're going to be talking about the future of energy, and this kind of sort of segues on from what we were talking about last week in terms of Mother Nature, economic growth, what this planet can sustain, and I guess just as a jumping off point, thinking about how the world is changing in the sense of what its energy demands are, where we're going to get our energy from. These are all very important questions for the 21st century and it's a challenge I think that we haven't had to face as yet, because fossil fuels were at one stage abundant. We could burn through them as merrily as we could, but now that it's not looking like the case. So and I guess just to start off with, nuclear power is sort of not really looking too good at this stage because of everything that happened in Japan. So how do you see things, Steve?
Well, there's all sorts of angles to approach this from. I think it's a bit unfair for nuclear power to be judged by what happened in Japan. Although it certainly does show the dangers of nuclear power, so you can't take nuclear power lightly. Look, they should never have built those original reactors, those original 4, which hadn't been upgraded where they were built. 40 years ago when they built those reactors, they were told not to build them on a fault line because exactly what happened would happen. This is the real problem with the way humans go about planning and, implementing ideas. They built something where they shouldn't have. They didn't upgrade it for the proper safety features, and 40 years later the earthquake that no one could ever remember happening before happened. You have a disaster. But if you look at nuclear power, there are next generation nuclear power plants. There's thorium reactors they're working on, which are quite safe by comparison with today's current nuclear technologies, as would be integral fast reactors, which are sometimes known as 4th generation reactors. And I think what we're to do here, along with the social transition, is change the way we see nuclear fuel. The nuclear power cycles, which have been used now for probably the 60 years that we've had nuclear power, they are actually geared around producing weapons-grade plutonium. And that was because the idea was not only do we get power, but we also get weapons, and we need them to blow up the enemy. The next generation of nuclear power plants burn a lot more efficiently and a lot more safely and need not produce as much dangerous waste as we have now. If they're properly designed and if we learn the lessons from Fukushima, you could conceivably have useful, productive and reasonably safe nuclear power plants.
Yeah, it's almost like they almost got a bad rap, I think, because there's so many good things and bad things that could be done with nuclear power. One thing I had heard, I think the Chinese, for example, were looking at building nuclear reactors, but they were building
thorium reactors.
Yeah, and something about they were making them shock resistant, so that if something like in Japan occurred, it would be able to withstand something like that. It's quite fascinating how they're going about that.
Well, it's interesting. A thorium-based reactor as well, which is still in the experimental stages, both in India and China. They cannot. They're not fissile, so they can't actually undergo the chain reaction without a separate source of neutrons. Okay, so effectively, if what happened in Japan happened with a thorium reactor, the reactor would just shut down and it wouldn't be dangerous.
Right.
So there are actually ways to create, reactors. If we really want to change the way we go and, you know, produce more and more energy for everyone in the world, not just fossil fuel for the West, then, yeah, you can look at reactors like that.
Well, it seems to me that we're sort of standing at this sort of critical point now where there's like any number of directions, you know, society could go with this. You know, on the one hand, if you're thinking more on the optimistic side, if we transition to renewable energy, to the type of energy that is cheaper to produce and very good for the environment, then it's quite possible that even if we have like so many people in the world, that all these people will be able to have access to that energy. And that's like the best case scenario. But on the flip side, you know, there's also this other crisis that if nothing is done and we continue to rely on fossil fuels, then we could start seeing some seriously bad things happening with people starting to fight over whatever is left. So it's sort of, we're not quite sure where this is going to go at this stage.
We're not, but there's some really interesting things I've seen firsthand in places like India and even China. And I'm not talking about, you know, where they're building new structures in China or new cities, which are very energy efficient because they can plan them to be. I mean, part of the biggest problem with where the West is at the moment is that all our infrastructures are built with, you know, petrol or fossil fuel or a barrel of oil, whatever you want to call it, being $15 a barrel. So you can afford to have inefficiency. One thing I'm saying that's been very interesting in India and lots of parts of Asia is solar cells. So you might have somebody who's living in what we might consider, you know, not necessarily modern surroundings, you know, in a mud hut or whatever. But if they as a community, as a village, or even individually can afford to buy a solar panel, there's no structure necessary. So in the West, where we're used to building a new suburb, you know, 100 k's away from the power plant, and you actually have to go and stick in power poles and power wires and transformers and all this infrastructure to get that power to these people that are living in an urban, sprawling environment. You know, the flip side of this is in emerging places, these guys are powering themselves with a solar cell and then not having that much power, only powering the necessities. It's highly efficient. It's improving their standard of living. And one thing they're certainly not is wasteful, which unfortunately we've tended to be. We use more and more, not less than less.
Well, that's an interesting point as well, is that it's not just this idea of we have to produce more and more energy. We also have to be better at the way we go about it, and it just seems
sharing it. And we have to share energy with everyone.
It just seems like horrendous, this idea, as you sort of touched on there, that in Western economies and the way everything is built, they're literally going to have to sort of rip everything out and lay the groundwork for all the stuff that will be feasible for the future.
Absolutely. Now, you've been to China, I know that, and you would have seen some of the new developments that they've made in the cities. And because they're starting from the ground up, can build the efficiencies in. They know they've got so many people, or the city will be so big, they can't afford to mess it up. They can't afford to waste electricity or power as we do in trying to string another set of poles somewhere, or dig another pit to stick another cable. Yeah. So those sorts of things are really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking in terms of, if we move away from, these are more traditional type of energy that we're talking about there, but say something, what other types of energy do you think could you see practically being used in the future?
Well, really, the only other source of energy capable of, say, providing base load, and when I say base load, think of a city. Think of a big city and the fact that you need to supply a large constant amount of power to that city. Okay, That's called base load. So far in history, we've only had coal and nuclear capable of doing that. Yeah. The only other form that may be able to do that is geothermal energy. And that's where they drill holes right down deep into the Earth's crust where they're very, very hot rocks. They pipe water down onto the hot rocks. The water boils, and these rocks are about 250, 300 degrees Celsius. That steam is then forced back up a borehole and turns a turbine, just like a normal power station.
Right.
Geothermal, there's enough energy to provide base load just like a coal or nuclear-fired power plant. But your renewables like wind and solar, in the short term, can, but, they can't give you 24-hour supply.
Yeah, so they're more like supplements then when you hear people talking about whether we should be building more and all that sort of thing. Because, I mean, you'd think say like in Australia, for example, that there'd be some sort of place for, solar power.
Well, yeah, and solar and wind, and there's a lot of solar and wind development going on in Australia, and solar thermal now, not just the photovoltaic cells, not the black cells that just absorb sunlight, but the big mirrors, mirror farms that reflect sunlight and concentrate it onto a concentrator. And that boils salts, molten salts, and they use that to get power from. That's very, very good, but people don't understand that the engineering to create all these, solar plants or wind farms, to put them in, even if you've got a team of engineers and a team of workers, it's going to take you 20 years to put in enough of them to start to make a decent impact.
Well, that's even just the case of even if we wanted to put in nuclear plants or whatever else. Like, for example, we don't have anything like that here.
That's an interesting point on nuclear, okay? We don't have the skills or technologies here for Australia to do it ourselves. But the thing is that a nuclear power plant will sit straight on top of a coal-fired power plant. So if you've got a coal-fired power plant, you don't want to use it anymore because of the carbon. You can decommission it, build your nuclear power plant on top of where the coal-fired power plant is, and then you've already got all the wires and all the infrastructure and everything you need. So it's actually very cost effective, and it's not very energy intensive to change over to nuclear.
Absolutely. Well, that's all very interesting, but I guess at the end of the day, it also represents will, doesn't it, to do it? Because a lot of interest in making sure the coal industry keeps going. Like in any sort of market-based economy, it makes money. It's an industry. It employs people. So there's like inevitable, as you would have heard, with the current debate in Australia about the carbon tax and the subsequent ETS that's going to come in. Everyone's freaking out about how coal's going to be shut down and all that sort of thing. But you would think that in an economic world that there'd be a capacity to enable a transition from one to the other without the level of pain that they're talking about, if we do it in the right way.
If we do it in the right way, but look, let's face it, someone's going to lose some money.
Yeah.
We're not talking about a few dollars down the back of the couch. We're talking about multi-billion-dollar industries. They're big industries, and everything's tied up in good old fossil fuel energy. And also we as a society, as a Western society, we're very wasteful. Everything from water, food, through to energy, and it's only because energy's been too cheap. And I think whatever you might say about taxes, etc., rising prices are a tax, whether you're officially taxed or not. It's the only way to get people to use less is to put a price on it. People value it then, and use less. We can't go on, just using things and wasting energy.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good point to finish up on. So we're out of time again. So thanks again, Steve, for the chat. Always interesting. So don't forget, visit our website, www.fistchat.com. We'll be back again next week. So until then, have a good week.